Hey everybody, so here's a little short unit on Egypt because it's kind of a cool place to study in ancient history and kind of look at some of the interesting ideas and developments that took place during the Egyptian civilization, okay? So we'll do a quick little week or two unit on this. Nothing very long, nothing very in-depth. It's kind of a big summary. Once again, we can teach entire courses about all these different civilizations. We're kind of just doing very little smattering of what's going on here. First, we'll look at ancient Egypt. A lot of people think about King Tut and pyramids, all that kind of stuff, but really it's a long, long time. We're talking thousands of years of history here, ending around 1075 BCE. So, really, when you think about it, it's been 3,000 years since ancient Egypt was a thing. It started almost 5,000 years ago. So, we divide this time into three periods with the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. You can see when they start here. So the Old Kingdom from about 2700 to 2150 BCE, Middle Kingdom from 2040 to 1786 BCE, and then the New Kingdom from 1570 to 1075 BCE, with periods in the middle called intermediate periods. That's where other people will rule Egypt, or there's chaos or stuff going on in between those little times there, okay? And those are the three periods we have to know about when this history is happening here. Now, one of the biggest things about the Egypt is the idea of the Nile River. And the Nile River is really that lifeblood of ancient Egypt. They said it was the gift of the Nile, according to the first historian named Herodotus, who was a Greek guy who wrote about Egypt 500 years after Egypt was done. And so it's I call it chill river, right? Because it's predictable. Every single year, the river flooded the exact same time. Every single year, it flooded the exact same way for the most part. In which it would flood, it would lay this nice little layer of silt down on the shores of the river. It could plant everything in those little areas of silt. They dug these little pits that collected water and used it for irrigation over the course of the year. It was very, very predictable. Predictable here is good if you're a farmer, because if you're a farmer, you want to know when things are going to flood, when things are going to happen. There's a lot of weird stuff we have to go through the river and talk about later on. We'll get into a little bit. But also, it was really important because they encouraged trade. You could use boats up and down the river, and we'll talk about the kind of boats they had and do a little activity with that. We'll talk about the communication to go up and down the river to connect this civilization that was present there. We have political unity because we're going to see that Egypt is going to be united around this river when it is. And also then about free time, right? And free time is you farm, you have all this stuff to do. So you can enjoy life and do things for fun, right? And it kind of gives that idea of what people can do. We're also going to see the religious importance of this river too, right? In this ancient civilization where it divided life. It was kind of the idea of living in the dead. If you're on the east side of the river, that's the land of living. The west side is the land of the dead because of how the sun comes up and goes down. When the sun comes up, things are good, right? Sun goes down, that's where you have the idea of land of the dead. So on the west side of the river is where you find things like the pyramids, like the tombs, because that is where the land of the dead existed. Now, really, we have two Egypts, right? They call it Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. And it's weird because it's opposite of the map. So lower is north and upper is south, which when you think about it on a normal map, looks really, 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 really weird, right? So early on, there were two different places. You had Memphis and you had Thebes, two different cities that kind of these old Egyptian empires. So Upper Egypt was the upper portion of the Nile River. Nile River runs from south to north. When you're upriver, that's Upper Egypt. And so they believed that a white crown for their king, and the king wore a white crown, supposedly what we couldn't tell from the research. And they used a god named Horus, who was a falcon god, was very powerful. The lower one down here, downriver, lower river was Memphis down here, around the delta part, and that was the northern part near the end of it had a red crown. And so early on, there's these two different Egypts that existed, okay? We're going to see a guy named Narmer, also has Menes, depends who you look at. A lot of times there's two names for a lot of Egyptian kings. One is the actual Egyptian term. The other one is a Greek or Latin term, who basically brought it together. Now, we know this because when they did excavations and looked at all this information, they found that his name was listed twice, both as King of North and King of South. Also, they found he had the two different crowns put together. And so they took the red crown, the white crown, and made him into one crown, a red and white crown that had both parts of it. So now he had new capital, and trade and pottery, and good things that kind of come out of this civilization uniting these two parts together. So one of the major roles we have of a pharaoh, right, this king of Egypt, is that term of king, right? And so he is essentially a god king. So in terms of being god king, you're both God and man, it's basically, okay? So like in temporal areas, you have control of like all the people, right? They own the land, own the people. What do the people do? They have all the law, no city walls, that kind of stuff, right? Because he controlled the people, right? But also then people thought that the pharaoh was also a directive son of the sun god and controlled access to afterlife and was actually a god on earth. And so they can be both a god and a king and be better than human. I thought that when they actually do certain things, their ceremonies and stuff made things happen. And for example, they thought that the king doing a certain ceremony would make the river flood. Really, the rivers flooded every single year at the same time, but the pharaoh did this one thing, river floods, it's the pharaoh doing it. And as a god, he kind of has that power that way. So here's our first question. Answer it for me, please. Good, thanks. All right, here's the second question. Answer it for me, please. Awesome. All right, so our Old Kingdom. So the Old Kingdom we're going to start with here is kind of one of the really cool parts of Egypt. I think a lot of people think about when think of the big monuments and all that kind of stuff. And the time when farming really got big, they grew barley and wheat. One of the main things that they ate was bread and beer. A lot of carbs going on here in ancient Egypt, and the beer was there a lot of times to keep people docile and happy and all that. They also had a lot of onions and leeks. So like, imagine a meal of bread, onions, cheese, beans, and beer. That's pretty much what it was. Not a lot of meat involved because you're in the middle of the desert, right? So it's not a big thing. Early on, we find people like buried dead in what's called mastaba, this thing right here, okay, which was like this big rectangle out in the desert. They put their dead in those little rectangle type things. We kind of see this thing called bureaucracy develop this time. So bureaucracy means that there's levels of government. So essentially, you have a pharaoh in charge of everything, but then he or she has little underlings underneath them. So like you have different governors, you have different secretaries, different rulers that are underneath you, kind of control day-to-day kind of stuff. So like you have a pharaoh on top, then underneath you have different levels of people, right? And we'll kind of look at some of these different people when we talk about our social classes later on. But you have governors, right? So like the pharaoh's in charge of everything, but then each of these little places here is called a nome. And nomes are like little states, essentially, that were ruled by a person appointed by the pharaoh. And so that way, like the pharaoh kind of gave orders to these other people, and they kind of control them after that. Kind of a little puppet kind of situation. They also had their scribes who could write and read the hieroglyphics, and we'll look at the hieroglyphic language later on too and kind of explore that a little bit later. But you can kind of see where they have these certain people whose job is to record everything, write everything down, send orders, read the books and those kind of things for people. You kind of see this is kind of the time of pyramids, you want to call it. So you kind of see all the different kings that were here, the pharaohs that were here, going to different pyramids, and they existed. So we see different dynasties of families of rulers that rule this time, and the different monuments that they'll build for themselves in the afterlife. One of the first big people in the know is a guy named Djoser. Looks like Djoser was Djoser. He was kind of like, he had people who were viziers. Viziers are like the top advisor to a pharaoh, and kind of was like their governor kind of person. He's known for building the first pyramid called Step Pyramid. So he kind of built this giant pyramid here for himself in the afterlife to be what he wanted to be. And so he kind of built the first ever pyramid. And then you have this dude Snefruru who builds this weird little medium-shaped pyramid that was kind of collapsed over time. He also built something called the Red Pyramid, which is made out of red bricks, basically. And so he used a lot of different wars and captured a lot of people and basically trying to build these giant monuments to show how awesome they were and for their home in the afterlife, as we see kind of those monuments in the desert. We get to the guy named Khufu. Now, Khufu is one who a lot of people know about. There's only one image of him, this right here, who organized the Great Pyramid of Giza that we see outside Cairo today. Not much to know about him, except for he built this giant pyramid, which we see right here, right? This huge tomb for himself that would have been, hundreds of feet tall, covered in shiny, polished marble, had a gold cap on it, and you kind of see the whole part over here. Right? You kind of see where you get in, how there's fake passages and place for his grave and place for his queen's grave and all that kind of stuff and all the goods that he had buried with him for the afterlife. It was a huge workforce, probably not slaves. We'll talk about it a little bit later on. If it was slaves or work crews, a lot of times we think it was like off-season farmers, maybe slaves. We'll talk about it a little later on. We know that people worked on it because there's graffiti inside. People actually carve their names and stuff into the walls to say, hey, I worked on this, or I did this, or I was here, that kind of thing, which is kind of cool to show about these pyramids, right? And so then here's our third question. Go ahead and answer for me. Here's our fourth question. Go ahead and answer for me. All right. So we see sons. So we have a dynasty. A dynasty is a series of rulers. So when Khufu dies, then his sons take over. Deshevri, he died really quickly. And then Khafre, who built himself another pyramid. He also built this thing called a sphinx right here. This idea of the head of it's a body of a lion, head of a man, as a way to rule the people or kind of guard the pyramids, I guess, until we see this hanging out. You actually find the tail of it if you go check out Egypt and kind of see that. It's actually really kind of cool. Supposedly he was a very cruel leader from what we know from a little bit that's written about him, that he was kind of a mean dude. But he built himself the medium-sized pyramid. And then we have Menkaure, who built a very short pyramid because he was the shortest ruler, right? He had a very short rule, so only 12 years built a pyramid, so they kind of like made it really small. But he made people happy, which was good. The question is, why do people fall? Now, notice we don't have a lot of information because we don't have a lot of information. We don't have a lot of details on day-to-day living, what happened, which we'll learn more about later on. But we have a ton of details about this outside of like all the government-y kind of stuff. We know that at some point something happened, right? Whether it be a civil war or who becomes the new king, outside invaders, we're not really sure. Maybe the Nile River level dropped something. But all we know is the old kingdom fell apart. We're not sure why, possibly different reasons why. And we believe that first intermediate period after that. And we have this little gap before we have more information coming from that middle class, that next intermediate period. So we'll do our last question for you guys here. Make sure you answer this one for me on your form. And this one here. And we're going to stop there, everybody. Thank you for your attention. I appreciate it. And I'll see you guys in class.